Yeah. Maybe Ginger. Shop with that? No, no. Did you go on the dog? The girl could visit the truck. Oh, I'm working with him, JJ.
Oh gosh, where is JJ? Oh, you did say you would say someone. No, I just wanted to meet someone. I know that the camera is on here by itself. Okay. Oh yeah, the guys in the fixing told me you were here. Okay, no worries. Okay, we'll be starting. Okay. Yeah, I think we should get started, everyone, please. Okay, I'd like to thank everyone who's here this afternoon for the second Nedbank Chair Annual Lecture. And I'd like to welcome each one of you to this event. And as with any good event, there's rain outside. So this is a good event, right? And I want to just start by welcoming our special guest this afternoon. First of all, Dennis, thank you so much for obliging yet again. Dennis is the Chief Economist at the Nedbank Group, and we're always glad to have him here. Very cordial person. We really do enjoy our interactions with you. And we'd also like to welcome Sepo. Sepo is the portfolio manager for the trust that funds the Nedbank Chair. We'd like to welcome you, Sepo, as well. Okay. And then, of course, we have our special guests from the 4 schools that made the final of the Nedbank Schools project competition. We're very glad to have all of you. We have 4 schools represented this year. One school has 2 learners that are finalists, and then the other 3 schools have 1 learner representing the schools. They're here with their teachers, and I think it is worth noting that Mr. Luti, right, Mr. Luti? Mr. Luti is an alumni of Fort Hare. He's one of the teachers, so it's fantastic to have him here. And we will introduce the teachers, I think, as they come up here to do their presentations. But my job here is simple, to just say welcome and thank you for coming to the lecture. It is a very timely topic, I think, Dennis, that you are presenting to us, particularly with the volatility that is emanating, not only because normally we talk about the politics, don't we? We're very aware, but the risks that actually poses for financial markets and how that has contributed to the stalling of our economy. Just the other day I was reading an article and it was talking about how SMMEs are going to suffer over the next 2 years because our economy is going to stall. And I think it's important to understand those factors, those key drivers of that event, because it's important, especially for us as researchers, both students and lecturers, to be able to understand the areas in which perhaps our research should focus to try and find answers, not just to understand why we're stalling, but how we can get out of that situation. And I think that's really important. So we thank you very much, Dennis, for this timely topic. And without much ado, then I will invite Dennis to come and give us a lecture. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Professor, and thanks for inviting me again to this event. Yeah, it sounds like a bit of a depressing sort of topic, and I don't want it to be very, very depressing, because I do think that South Africa's got immense talent. It's got huge resources. It's got all the ability to put itself into a much higher growth path. I think this economy should be growing by 4.5% per annum, and we should be creating jobs, at the order of 250,000 a year. Quite simply, but quite a lot has to actually be done to restructure after, I think, what's been quite a difficult period. So that's the picture of the economy. If you look at the South African economy over a number of decades, all the way back to 1990, when I was in primary school, as I'm sure a few of you were as well. And you can see what happened is, after the election, we had this ratcheting up of economic growth, which reached about 5.5% growth over quite a long period of about 4 or 5 years, just prior to the global financial crisis in 2008. So you can see that red line that's showing you the average growth rates over 5-year periods. Then we had the financial crisis. We went into recession. That was absolutely what happened to most economies around the world. So there was nothing unusual about that. We had a good bounce back in 2010 with the World Cup, as well as a lot of infrastructure spending by Eskom, as well as some of the other parastatals. And we went through a reasonable period where, growth of about 2% odd. But unfortunately, as you can see over the last few years, from around about 2014, 2015, we've experienced growth only about 0.7%, which is completely inadequate to absorb new people into the labor force and to provide the resources that we actually need to meet the social needs, as well as expand the economy in a much more meaningful sort of way. You can see, very unfortunately, right at the end of this, you can see the last 2 quarters we've actually seen a contraction in the economy. Part of that is a bit technical, because we had a very good agricultural season up north with the maize crop. It was a record maize crop. This year we're going to see a smaller maize crop, and that's resulted in declines of about 20% in agricultural production. But as you know, and I mean, it's fantastic news, we're seeing rain outside right now. We have seen some relief in the Western Cape, the Eastern Cape as well, and hopefully I think the second half of the year is going to be a lot better than the first half. But nevertheless, stand back from that, never mind whether it contracted or not, what were the factors behind that. We remain in a very weak growth trap, as you can see. Now, often you'll hear people on the radio saying, and politicians in particular, oh, well, it was, the rest of the world has not done very well over this period. And I've just taken us back to 2010 to show you that per capita growth in per capita income, along with a whole set of peer countries, so in other words, emerging market economies in Africa, Asia, South America primarily, what's actually happening in those economies. And you can actually see from this, and I don't know how clear it is to all of you there, but right at the top, you've got an economy like Ethiopia, which has grown fantastically. It's off a very low base. They were doing very badly 2 decades ago, and then they started actually instilling quite a bit of discipline in that economy, quite a few innovative type of ideas, boosted agricultural production dramatically, but are now moving up the value chain into tech and even financial services now. So doing very, very nicely. You've got an economy like Vietnam, which is starting to actually, well, not starting to, it has been pulling jobs away from China because it's a very low-cost economy. So it's done exceptionally well in terms of per capita income. It's still a poor country, but it's growing very, very strongly. We've got Rwanda as well, which has been very, very innovative. Has tried to drive its cost of doing business down dramatically. So if you arrive at the airport, you'll see a big sign there saying, if you're a foreign investor, we will register your business in 1 day, which is actually very impressive, and it makes you already feel that they're focusing on the needs of the investor, and it's working. So they're also trying to actually move into the services side of the African economy. So they've created an airport hub. They've also and it's looking fairly successful at this point. They're attracting financial services, so they want to be a little bit like the Switzerland of Africa. And you can go down that list. You can actually see the growth rates. Some of them coming on very low bases. Some of them not doing well recently. For example, Mozambique did fantastically well with very big projects coming to fruition, and just more recently have done quite badly. They hit some of the debt which they incurred and got into all sorts of difficulties with both donors as well as investors. So they've done a lot less well. And of course, you've got countries like Nigeria and Angola, which have been hit earlier by the very weak oil price. The oil price is now recovering, so you'll see the recovery coming through there. But South Africa, as you can see, sort of third last there. Along with Brazil, which has not been a great success story recently. They went through a very severe recession in 2015, 2016, and just emerging very slowly at the moment. All sorts of difficulties, corruption in both the ruling parties and other parties, and also fairly erratic sort of policy environment. And then Venezuela, which has been a complete disaster. The last 3 years or so, we've seen about a 30%, a third contraction in the economy, which has really devastated that economy, with hordes of people trying to actually go to Colombia and neighboring countries. Not a great picture at all. So it's been quite a diverse picture, but in that diverse picture, we've not done that well, unfortunately. Now, one of the things that worries me the most when I go to sleep at night is unemployment. Unemployment levels, as you can see here, on the narrow measure, has been very, very high right from the outset of democracy. According to the ILO, it dipped to around about 17% or odd just in the early part of democracy, but at the moment at just over 27%. It's extraordinarily high. I mean, a lot of economies around the world would say we'd just not rest until that number came down significantly, and we've not done a lot to get it down. The lower line, the green line, just shows you the rank of South Africa amongst countries, and I'm using the International Labour Organization data here as well. You can actually see over the last few years, we've typically been in the top 10 of the worst performing when it comes to unemployment, which is not a place that you really actually want to be, obviously. So what's extraordinary about this is it's not only been high, but it's been persistently high. So there's something fundamentally wrong in the labour market. And of course, as you know, regionally we've actually had quite wide divergences. So here in the Eastern Cape, it's been even higher. And of course, amongst different age groups, it's been different as well. Amongst the young, it's been very, very high. Over half of the young population unemployed, which again is completely unacceptable and should keep policymakers awake at night. We've just had the Job Summit to try and actually address some of these things, and I'll maybe refer to that a little bit later on, where we can chat in the question time as well. Now, if you look at what's been happening over the last 10 years, and here I'm using quarterly employment survey statistics. If you go back to 2008, it's quite remarkable. There's been no job creation in the private sector. So that's a major problem, because the private sector employs, nearly 2/3 of total employment. It comes from the private sector. And this index shows that we had that big dip, obviously, with the recession. Some recovery in 2015, but basically we've been fairly flat over the whole period. As far as government is concerned, there was a massive sort of boom initially in public sector employment, as you can see in the top line there. And even prior to, just before 2008, we had fairly strong job creation. But more recently it's flattened out. And the reason why it's flattened out is basically we've run out of cash. From a central fiscus point of view. So, as you know, there have been caps on the number of people employed. They've tried to actually keep the wage bill down. It's a very large portion of the budget. nearly, well, I think around about a third or so. So it's obviously it makes up. Well, it's actually more than that. It makes up a large portion, and it's a very difficult thing to actually drive down because you can't typically find people in the public service, and typically they would actually want to have wages that increase by inflation more, as we've seen in the latest wage rounds. The other areas of growth have also been sort of public sector. It's been more in things like ESCOM, where there's been a big explosion in employment, very high wage increases in the utilities as well, and that's also led to financial problems, and that's also now led to some flattening out, and hence we're not seeing the required job growth coming through at this point. Now, if you think why would you actually not have that job creation coming through? Well, there are a few sectors that have not done terribly well at all. Manufacturing, mining, construction. If you look at this, these are indices. The base is 2010 is equal to 100, but you can actually see they're going all the way to 1990. Really very, well, no job creation and actually quite a bit of job destruction in those industries. So something's happening in those industries that's not actually generating jobs. And of course, it's had very devastating social consequences, so it has to be addressed. If you look at the production side, mining production, if you exclude the gold mining industry, which is in sort of like a long-term decline because it's going into more and more difficult grades, but you can see overall mining production picked up quite rapidly in the 1990s, another further acceleration, but over the last 5-10 years it's been fairly flat. And if you include gold, then basically it's a very static picture over a number of decades. So some mining's done quite well, but a lot of other areas just more recently have not done very well at all. Manufacturing. I think the thing that's concerning me about manufacturing, we've seen an overall increase over the last couple of decades, but what's very concerning is that normally when we have an international upswing, we see our manufacturing industry respond very quickly, and that's what I'm showing in this graph. If you look at the red line, that is the global coinciding indicators showing what's happening to world economic growth. So typically we'd be exporting into that story, we're doing quite well. But you can see again, the last 5-10 years, basically we've seen some upswing in the global economy. Once again, the coinciding indicators have gone up, particularly in 2017, where we had a very strong sort of synchronized upswing in the global economy, and unfortunately, really very little response when it came to our manufacturing industry. Again, it suggests that there's something strange going on. You know, what is happening there? Another structural thing that appears to have happened is that normally when we go through a period of low growth or recession, or but anyway, low growth, I would say anything under 3%, you would go into a current account surplus. That's exports minus imports. So what happens is you typically import a little bit less, your exports normally are doing okay, and you start running what's called the current account surplus. And if you look at this graph, you can actually see, in the 1990s we had surpluses and deficits. It was very much related to where we were in the cycle. If things were going strongly and the consumer was spending a lot and you were investing, then there were lots of imports. We run a current account deficit, which means the rest of the world's actually lending you money. But just more recently, again, you can actually see we've had this persistent current account deficit despite the fact that we're actually moving along quite slowly. So that again is fairly concerning, because it means that you're just saving without really seeing that increased production capacity in the economy, and that can be unsustainable over a period of time. The other thing is, if you look at debt, government debt, and the blue bars here show you debt as a percentage of the overall economy. So we had this big build-up in debt just prior to democracy and slightly afterwards. That was very much related to the public service pension fund being recapitalized. So there was a bit of a technical reason around it, but it also was due to a very long recession that persisted from about 1990 to late 1993. So typically you see debt going up over that sort of period. We then managed to get it down under Minister Manuel, mainly, I guess, managed to drive it down to about 25% of GDP, which is a very respectable sort of figure, and with that comes a lot of benefits. You're spending less money on interest bill, you're spending more money on social payments and so forth, and they're also able, even during that period, to actually have tax cuts, so it was beneficial for everyone all around. But you can see again, from around about 2009, 2010, we started to actually run that data, and it's now got to fairly concerning levels. So, over 50% is generally in an emerging economy is considered to be high. Why for emerging economy as opposed to developed economy? Well, typically emerging economies have higher interest rates, and it's all around the sustainability of growth versus interest rates as to whether you're going to be building up your debt rapidly. So in the budget, you can see the red numbers there. We get up to around about 56%. In the medium term, it's fairly uncomfortable. And there's another factor which makes it even more uncomfortable, and that is this red line here, which if you include contingent liabilities. And so, for example, that would be guaranteed debt. The government debt guarantees debt from Eskom, for example. They go out and launch a bond, and they get cash. Eskom gets cash, but government actually guarantees it. So if they actually default on that loan, then you can go back to the government and say, I want it back, and hence that's why it's a contingent liability. And you can see, if you include all the contingent liabilities, and there is no ways on earth that they're all going to default, so don't get excited, but you can see debt then would go up to around about 70%, which is very concerning, very, very high, and would put immense strain on the fiscus. So we've got to a point where we've kind of like used the ammunition in the fiscus, and it's very difficult to actually boost the economy through fiscal spending. So you would have seen when President Ramaphosa came out with his plan to get the economy moving again, they basically spoke about reprioritizing expenditure rather than actually boosting expenditure. And it remains to be seen. We'll see in a week or two's time whether where that money is going to be reprioritized from. But it's difficult to imagine that there are a lot of sources available at this particular time. So the other sort of constraint, so we've got a balance of payments constraint, a fiscal constraint that's emerged on the economy, and the other constraint would be the rating agencies. Later today, we've got Moody's rating agency, who's going to be looking at the country and the country's finances. We believe they're not going to change it, incidentally. Change their rating. At the moment, as you can see from this graph here, the blue line is Moody's. They've got us in investment grade, and the other rating agencies have us in sub-investment grade. Now, the importance of this is as you move into sub-investment grade, your interest rates go up. If your interest rates go up, then basically your debt goes up unless growth actually compensates. And obviously we haven't had growth compensating. So it is very important because it gives people a perception of what it's about and how sustainable the debt is, but in itself it can also put further stress on the fiscus. So again, it's a constraint in the sense that you have to look at what they're saying and basically put forward arguments as to why you wouldn't be doing anything differently. Now, all this fairly gloomy picture that I've put out to you has come against the background, I think, of not a bad global environment. So this graph here shows you what's called the terms of trade. It's the ratio of export to import prices. And you can see there, if you go back to the early 1990s, at the dawn of democracy, this terms of trade was actually fairly low. We were on this ratio 65, and we're currently a lot higher. So that means that export prices over this period, that's mainly our big sort of gold and platinum and metals and minerals, those prices have gone up by a lot more than what we import, which is primarily manufactured goods and so forth. And I mean, one of the reasons why that happened over this period here was when China became very aggressive in the global economy. They were basically driving down manufactured goods prices, but they also needed a lot in the way of natural resources. So we were in exactly the right sweet spot. We were supplying the natural resources, but then getting the benefit of lower goods and services. So you can see we have had a little bit of a dip over the last little while, but nevertheless we're still close to the peak of this improvement in the terms of trade. Hence we should actually be doing reasonably okay. It's normally an injection of wealth into the economy. And that came about as a result of, as I said, commodity prices generally doing exceptionally well. So typically, if you go back in history, and I got this back to 1975, but you can go back a couple of centuries, commodity prices go up, then they go down, they go up, they go down, they go up, they go down, but they never really break out of the zone. And what we had in the 2000s is the so-called super cycle where commodity prices suddenly moved into a completely different range. People got very excited that we were going to run out of all sorts of resources. People were talking about peak oil and so forth, and commodity prices went up very, very strongly. At the moment, as you know, the oil price is in the mid sort of $80. During 2007, 2008, it went up to about $150. So it was double where it was during that phase there. But it was actually quite good for us because it meant there was quite a big injection into the economy because we were exporting a lot of these commodities. It has come off, but again, as I said, other goods have come off quicker, and those are typically the ones that we've been importing over time. So if you look at our exports, they should have done reasonably well, although obviously correcting off what was a very high base a few years ago, particularly around about 2012 or so. The other thing is that over the last few years, there's been a huge amount of money washing around in the global economy. We had the financial crisis, and what emerged from that is that central banks basically began pumping lots of cash in to try and actually correct and try and keep the system afloat. And that so-called quantitative easing led to a lot of money washing around in the system. But that wasn't the start of it, because as you can see, this blue line here is basically, this is dollars washing around in the global system as a percentage of total world output. And you can see during the 80s it was pretty flat, and then it started going up as a proportion of the economy, showing the emergence of the financial sector, but also what was happening during that phase is that China was giving dollars for its exports and then pumping it back into the global system, back into the financial, the United States by buying US bonds, and that also led to this big surge in liquidity. But the good news for emerging markets is a lot of that money then had to find a home, and it found it in countries like South Africa. So the bad news, though, before I move off that, is that you can see they are now starting to cut back on the liquidity. They're withdrawing the quantitative easing. They're trying to normalize monetary policies. And we also see in the United States is starting to raise interest rates to normalize, so-called normalized interest rates. Because have a look at this. I mean, interest rates have basically been zero since 2009, or so, 2009. And it's only just recently that US interest rates have now lifted off that very, very low base, but they're still in negative territory. In other words, they're still below inflation, so they're still basically accommodating a lot of spending in the US economy. The bad news again, though, is that if they withdraw liquidity and raising interest rates, then the so-called risk-free rate for the world goes up. I'm sure you're familiar with the term, but if US bond prices start coming down and US interest rates going up, the risk-free rate is that you can put your money in a US bond and you know that you're not going to lose the money. But the bad news is that every investment in the world is basically sort of indexed against that particular bond yield. So if it's going up, then basically the hurdle rate for investment is also going up. And that is what's happening at the moment, and why over the last few days we've seen world equity markets sort of been really shaky, because they're trying to actually digest what this might actually mean going forward after a very long period of interest rates, coming down right through the 1990s into the 2000s, and up until very recently, all you saw was really interest rates coming down, and now they're starting to go up. From a South African point of view, I mean, we've benefited hugely from that liquidity. Maybe if you just focus on the sort of like the pink line, those are cumulative purchases of South African bonds by foreign investors since 1996. So you can see really not much interest in South Africa up until about 2009. Then we had quantitative easing, and basically a lot of global investors came in and bought South African bonds to the tune of about 280 billion rands worth of bonds. Okay, so was it a good thing or a bad thing? It's actually a really good thing, because basically they were funding our excess spending, if I can put it that way, because they were funding our deficit, and they were happy to actually provide that funding at fairly reasonably low interest rates. So very, very positive for South Africa. But now we're in a situation where that debt's built up, and clearly if they all exit, if we have a downgrade, for example, by Moody's, heaven forbid today, then you might actually see that pink line coming down a little bit more dramatically, which would not be good news at all. As I said, we don't expect that. We think enough has been done, but nevertheless, it is a danger into the future. That could lead to interest rates going higher in South Africa. Of course, global interest rates help us to reduce our interest rates. So if you look at this graph, again, going all the way back to 1990, and the red line, or the pink line, shows you that prime interest rates, if you go back to 1990, you can actually see that prime at one point was over 20%. That was Dr. Stolz at the Reserve Bank at that point. We had a couple of very big spikes. That was the emerging market crisis in 1998, the Asian crisis, which then spilled over into Russia and South Africa and Brazil. But overall, the general sort of pattern has been for interest rates to come down, for each peak to be lower and each trough to be lower going through. And this latest cycle, you can see, has been very benign. I mean, not much of a peak, and we've managed to slip in a couple of interest rate cuts, although the Reserve Bank is starting to warn that interest rates might be on the way up during the course of 2019 in particular. And that, of course, that would actually be a concern. But again, the point that I'm stressing here is that had we not seen those developments internationally, we probably wouldn't have seen interest rates locally come down, and they would have put us in a different sort of position. Now, what's caused all this? I mean, why are we in this? So the global environment's been fairly supportive, but as I showed you, industrial production, mining, not looking good. Why are we actually seeing all that weakness coming through? Now, this graph here, I think, is quite an interesting graph. Okay, it shows you mining exploration from 1980 in constant rand terms, and what you see is relatively high levels, then a dip in the early 2000s, late 1990s, early 2000s, the big commodity boom leading to another pickup in mining exploration, and then a complete collapse over the last few years. So that takes you up to 2017. And the complete collapse is, I mean, it's actually quite remarkable and very, very negative, because to keep your mining industry going, you constantly have to have exploration spending taking place. So there's something fundamentally problematic in this graph. It's showing that mining companies just don't has been financially worthwhile to actually put in any further exploration into the industry. Now, we know in the last few years, I mean, we've had very uncertain mining policies. We had the previous version of the mining charter, which put all sorts of demands on the industry. Some of them very justified, clearly, don't get me wrong. I think that there's absolutely a need for social spending and so forth. But it also put a big question mark over the returns from mining as well as the risks from mining, and I'll discuss that a little bit later on as well. Another big policy area was in tourism. So in 2014 odd, the current Home Affairs Minister was the then Home Affairs Minister, and we had the introduction of those visa and biometric testing requirements. Now you can actually see just prior to that, we obviously had the 2010 World Cup, which was very positive, and post the 2010 World Cup, I mean, it was quite remarkable. If you went through ORT International Airport, you often saw children's groups coming through from Peru and Chile and whatever, they're coming here on tours and so forth. And then we introduced this very strange, very, very onerous sort of biometric testing, and the fact that you had to bring unabridged birth certificates, which is immensely difficult to actually get. And China, tourism from China had been increasing by 20, 30, 40% per annum. That was really where most of this big boost came through here. And then you can actually see a collapse. There was another factor, incidentally, in that particular year, which clouded it to some degree, and that was the breakout of the Ebola virus in West Africa, which you might have heard me say before, but I mean, absolutely bizarre that South Africa would be seen as a more dangerous destination as a result of Ebola breaking out somewhere that is actually closer to London than basically where we are at the moment. So it just gives you some sort of sense how sensitive tourists can actually be and how worried they are. And London, incidentally, had one case of Ebola in South Africa, no cases of Ebola, so it wasn't justified at all. But the fact that we didn't really see a quick pick-up, and let me just say, the rest of Africa moved in a very different direction. We actually saw tourism picking up, for example, in Kenya, very rapidly after that was actually sorted out. Again, showed that there was something slightly different and quite negative. Now, this number here, to be honest, we should now have been at close to 500,000 tourist arrivals from overseas. Africa, it's difficult to actually unpack because we get a lot of sort of day people coming and shopping and so forth, but this gives you a clear indication of what's actually happening in the overall market. And again, it's so simple and is so simple to sort it out that it's very frustrating. The other thing that had happened, which I think has knocked us off course, has been electricity. Both initially the fact that our energy supply was inconsistent. In 2008 we had the blackouts because of the lack of coal supply, and we've struggled basically ever since. You can see Eskom's production here. These are Statistics South Africa figures. The blue line basically is similar to levels that we saw in 2006, despite the fact that we've actually got more in the way of production capacity coming through from Medupi and Kusile. And the reason for that is that our plant is not running as efficiently as it was in those earlier years, because everything's getting a lot more tired and older. The renewable energy industry, which is the difference between the red line and the blue line, you can actually see quite a boost coming through there and really saving us, I would actually say, from a production point of view. But the other negative thing that happened here was that the electricity price rose by about 350% over the last 10 years, which is a huge increase and basically a big cost to absorb by manufacturing, which typically is very energy intensive, as well as mining, which is also very energy intensive. And I think this was one of the big factors that hurt us somewhat during that period. I have to say, very good that the new integrated resource plan by government has come out. I think it's a much more balanced sort of picture. It avoids us going heavily into the nuclear deal, which I think would have been extraordinarily expensive and is not particularly necessary. So I think it paints the right sort of path going forward, and I think we'll get this problem under control. But nevertheless, it has hurt us up until now. Right, so I thought, just so my view of what's gone wrong is that I think that when you look at individual firms making their individual decisions about investment, the risk-reward balance has gone a little bit out of sync. Okay, so as you know, net present value, if you're evaluating a project out there, basically you have to put in some initial capital, and then you've got a balance between revenue and costs over time, and you discount that with normally something like the weighted cost of capital, average weighted cost of capital, which is a mixture of equity and debt. But if you think about it in really simple terms, an investor can either take his, R1 million and go and invest it in a government bond, and he's going to get 9%. Or he can take that R1 million and he can go invest it in a factory. And this equation really just kind of like gives the balance. So should he go and invest in a government bond and get 9%, it's completely risk-free. He's going to get that money back from the government. There's no pain. He doesn't have to deal with trade unions. He doesn't have to deal with suppliers. He doesn't have to worry about what the tax situation is going to be, what incentives, etc. How many people he has to employ, and so forth. So that's the decision. So normally when you look at the hurdle rate, investors are looking at, they want at least 13-14% to cover all the hassle around business. Otherwise they might have just invested in a government bond, which often happens in the African context. So if you want to change the balance of this equation, you've either got to boost the revenue, reduce the costs, or basically reduce the hurdle rate. And they somehow are very much interlinked. So it's just, it's very simple, and it's not profound at all. But just to give you a bit of a sense, if you're in the mining industry and you come in here to put up a mine, let's just say you're from, I don't know, another African country or South American country or Australia or whatever, and you want to come and put up a mine, you put all what you expect you're going to get in terms of revenue, what you're going to pay out in costs, and as I said, you've got that hurdle rate to think about. So let's just say you come in and the government just says to you, okay, all we require of you is that you come put the mine up and you pay your taxes. So this is the first line here, and when you come in, you have to put in a whole lot of cash without getting any benefit. You're starting to sink the shafts, you're doing all those sort of things. It takes a while before you actually start to get any revenue flow, because you're putting in the infrastructure, you're putting up the buildings, you're putting up roads, etc. So the first few years you're earning nothing, your costs are very high, and basically that revenue minus cost equation is actually very unattractive. And after about 5, 6, 7 years, you start to actually make some cash. And then if you're lucky, commodity prices are doing well, and you manage to keep your costs under control, and then you start to actually get your profits. So your profits start going up quite nicely. And then as you go into weaker and weaker grades, you start to get less in the way of revenue, your costs remain very similar, so that picture looks worse. And then right at the end, you can actually see there's a big cost at the end. You basically have to rehabilitate the mine. So now the mine is closed, but now you've got to actually make sure that you restored it to its ecological best, and there's quite a big rehabilitation cost right at the end. So you take in all those sort of cash flows, you're discounting it, and you come up with either a plus or a minus. And depending whether if it's in the plus, then you invest. If it's in the minus, then you don't invest. So now just imagine, instead of this unencumbered sort of decision, you have a situation where they hire initial charges. The government says they want you to put up a factory for beneficiating the goods, but you're not a manufacturer, so it's going to cost you more than it would a normal manufacturer. They ask a number of other sort of requirements which push up the initial costs. They basically, during the course of the mine, they basically change their idea on revenues and mining rights and so forth, and that leads to higher costs. Basically, the economy is not doing that well, so the discount goes up. And also the risks increase, so the required hurdle goes up. Then suddenly your PV average over that whole period actually goes below the line. So that basically leads to a decision of no investment. And then what's happening in a number of our neighboring countries as well is that halfway through the mine, so you've put in all the investment, and you just started to make money in the previous example. You just started to make money, and the government comes and says, you're making extraordinary profits. It's crazy. What are you doing? This is ridiculous that you're making so much money. So they put on a royalty or a surplus tax, a commodity surplus tax and so forth. And then, obviously, you committed, but then the mine goes into, over the whole life of the mine, we basically go into a very negative present value sort of situation. So I'm now just illustrating, just to give you some sort of sense, because I think it's, we can talk big circles around these things, but this is the reality. When people assess investments, they're looking at this and making all sorts of calculations, and they can invest in any number of countries. And a lot of countries just sort of like roll out the carpet, but we make it very difficult often. So there are two sort of paths to try and fix this. As I've said, you've got the demand side, more interventionist sort of path, and I'd have to say South Africa is a very strange mix of both the demand side and the supply side sort of mix. So we'll often see very investor-friendly policies mixed with very un-investor-friendly policies. But if you look at the latest Job Summit resolutions, for example, it actually shows that mix quite interestingly. So among the resolutions was to, kind of like pay workers more, not actually cut any, not restructure workforces and so forth, raise social services, and the whole idea is that you get more money in the economy, that money is then spent, and that creates more activity, and then basically you get the economy moving. So effective demand is actually improving over this whole period. You cut regressive taxes like VAT, the fuel levy, which is very unpopular at the moment, obviously, with the petrol price above 17 Rand. Everyone is on the bandwagon basically wanting that particularly cut. You increase local procurement requirements, beneficiation requirements, to try and actually make sure that basically production stays here. Very strong competition law and penalties, and competition law, there's an amendment bill on the table at the moment, which will give the minister huge powers, basically to restructure industry, which I think would be very damaging, but we can chat about that. Typically, this school of thought is that you should have loose monetary policies, so cut interest rates, and that will generate more in the way of economic growth. Although we do know from bitter experience in a number of economies, including Argentina and Turkey just more recently, that if you go that route, typically inflation rises by more and you end up with much, much higher levels of interest rates. So again, not necessarily a great idea. You would have seen in Turkey, though, that if that happens, then basically people start talking about price controls, and again, that leads to problems. You then potentially have shortages in shops rather than actually inflation, so that doesn't necessarily work. Again, we can chat about that in the question time, and so on. But the whole idea is that the state's the deliverer, and that we must correct for private sector failure. The difficulty is that, I mean, it sounds good in principle, and some of the policies I think are good and have to be considered. But we actually have had a version of this over the last few years. If you look at what happened post the financial crisis, the big boost to the salary bill, the public sector salary bill, the massive increase in the deficit, and interest rates coming down at the same time, we actually haven't solved our underlying problem, which is job creation and greater improvement there. Localization, I think, definitely has its place. Local procurement definitely has its place. But we've got to be a little bit careful, because if it results in a situation where local prices are going up now more rapidly as a result of that, then it solves less than it actually, well, it creates more problems than it solves, because then consumers pay more, they have less money to spend on other goods and services, and it leads to a negative cycle rather than a positive cycle. Globally, if you look around the world at countries that have followed these sort of policies, particularly in South America. In South America, you've got a divide between simple Atlantic countries and Pacific countries on the other side. They followed starkly different policies, but countries like Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil to some degree have gone weak over the last few years, and over that same period you had countries like Colombia, Peru, Chile, who've done exceptionally well, following more the supply side examples, and then locally, obviously, there are examples as well. Okay, on the supply side, the idea there, and some of these are not manageable under the current circumstances either, is that you try to reduce the cost of doing business, you try and make it as attractive for business, you lower taxes, You lower import costs mainly because you've got very low tariffs on the regime. You encourage specialization, economies of scale, and so forth. Reduce the regulatory environment, so very much like a Rwanda type of example. You have strong competition law because you do want to actually maintain competition, but the objectives are more around opening up to competition rather than creating penalties for existing incumbents in those industries. You focus also on equality of opportunity rather than outcome, so education absolutely vital, vocational training, market-based interventions basically are seen as a way of overcoming state failure. So, I mean, this is in line with the so-called Spence report, the growth report that Trevor Manuel was part of, and was a very big exercise a number of years ago, where they listed these sort of like 5 factors that you should actually have as an ingredient for economic growth. It does contain some on the previous page as well, so let's not make any mistakes. But the bottom line is you want to actually have good, capable, honest leadership that is driving the economy for the benefit of all. You want to actually have an economy that fully exploits the global economy, so you want to be an export-oriented industry, but you also want to import where it's cheaper. You maintain modest inflation and good financial situation, fiscal situation, high levels of savings and investment. Well, that's been a characteristic of the Asian economies, but does suggest a certain amount of self-sacrifice before you actually move on to higher growth levels of growth. And then the market is the allocator, so you have a price or market economy, a so-called market economy, which we have in place at this point, but which we were at risk of tampering with in the previous administration. So I just want to conclude. I think, you know, it doesn't look great at the moment, but I think my policy intervention, and maybe it's something which the professor can go and do a little bit of research about. I think we should be looking at the creation of job creation zones. So we've already got the industrial development zones, the export processing zone type of idea. But in a job creation zone, my only requirement is that you create jobs and you pay taxes. And that it is also an area of investment that we've not had in the country before. So I'm not suggesting that you create these zones and everyone relocates to them. That wouldn't be a good idea. But if you've got an industry or a company that's doing something that's not been done in South Africa, they're welcome to come and set up in the zone and basically have a fairly regulatory light type of environment, and that they pay taxes, but very importantly that they employ people. Because that's how we're going to get this thing going. We need to actually have more employment so that we create more wages and we skill people and get things moving in that way. And then I think, aside from that, we've got very good opportunities in agriculture and tourism. I think the one positive thing coming out of the expropriation without compensation debate is that there's been a huge amount of, I think, very creative thinking, both in the sector as well as in the financial sector as well as in the public sector. And I think that you could easily double employment levels of 800,000 in the agricultural sector in a fairly short space of time. If you look at very comparable countries to ourselves, quite achievable. And then, as I mentioned, tourism is something that we could easily see a 30% growth in that industry in a very, very short space of time. So those are what I would actually focus on in the very short term to get things kick-started. And then as those actually develop, you could actually start putting in place a little bit more in the way of structural reform. Right, and the professor's looking very nervous. I've obviously overshot. So, Professor, do I have any time to take questions or comments?
Yes, you do. You have 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay, fantastic. I'm very happy to take any questions or, as I say, some comments.
Apologies, before we take the questions, I would just like to welcome our Vice Chancellor, Professor Sakele Bushum.
So no questions. I can't believe this. Was I that confusing? There we go. There's it. This looks like a formal budget speech competition.
Morning. Okay, I have a number of questions around the growth of the economy.
Yes.
And the concerns that we have for the economy in South Africa. For number one, job creation is the challenge that the government is going to take up right now. And you also mentioned that one of the things the government should do is to reduce the cost of doing businesses. Now, if the cost of doing businesses are going to be reduced, and then job creation is also supposed to be a priority, I'm trying to just oppose the two solutions because they seem to be contradictory each other. Because if you're going to create job and then you're going to also reduce cost of doing business. Take for example, I give you an example. You have a few stations, a garage where gas is sold, and I know one of the reasons why you have an attendant to man each of the pumps is because you want to be able to verify the cash that is collected, right? But those guys, many of them probably do not have the needed skills for employability in other sectors of the economy. So they take up those jobs. And now you want to reduce the cost of doing business so that the business can expand. Meaning that for those businesses that have been using non-POS pay point enabled forms, then they can remove the attendants, bring a pay point enabled forms so that you can do a self-service. That reduces the amount of money you pay on overheads, right? So it means then that money might be available to you for expansion in other areas, or maybe a new idea, or you get a new area where you build another gas station, right? But has it not contributed to unemployment eventually? That's number one. So if you're reducing cost of doing business, especially cutting down, bringing in technologies and all that, which is very, very good. How do we obscure the youth and the employable percentage of the population so that they will be, excuse me, so they will be employable in other sectors, they will be usable in other sectors, not that they all want to go back home or turn to nuisance in the society. My second question is on market-based interventions. Market-based interventions. Now, there's a debate around land. And when you talk about market-based intervention, I want to wrap my question around agriculture. I understand that if you boost agriculture in the country, you're going to provide a lot of raw materials for manufacturing and all that. Now, if we are talking about market-based intervention as one of the solutions to fixing the problem of unemployment in South Africa, if we go into agriculture, for example, I have this raw model at the back of my mind that, see, for you to decongest a country, a particular country, because usually you have a pull factor in the cities that bring people to the cities, and then the cities are congested. Now, for you to decongest the cities, you have to give to people who are in the rural areas what they go to the cities to find, right? Which is what China did and other Asian tigers. And they urbanized the rural areas so that the cities are decongested and all that. But however, it took a long time. What I'm saying now is this: in the light of the debate around land and all that we have in South Africa, and you want a market-based intervention to drive employment, especially in agriculture. How do you go about the socio-cultural issues and the lot of debates to handle land? Because if you are going to go along the chains of in agriculture, you want to plant, some people want to buy, some other people want to process, some will be engaged in marketing and all that, all the chains in agriculture. You are going to provide land for these people. Now, for easy access, they need to just you evoke a section of the Constitution that says all the land belongs to the government and all that, and then you give it to the investors. How do you, in the light of the debate, sorry, on the debates around land, how do you go about driving a market-based intervention, especially in agriculture, in the light of that debate? Then finally,
okay, I think let me answer those two, and then we'll take it from there. Okay. So I don't think there's any contradiction between reducing cost of doing business and job creation at all. I think the two go hand in hand. I mean, your example of the petrol attendants, if you look at a lot of countries around the world, they do have self-service. I mean, if you go to the States, for example, you never see anyone serving it and so forth. But that's what's evolved over time, because at a point, technology becomes a lot cheaper than manual labor. Now, the US has got an unemployment level of 3.7% at the moment. It doesn't mean that because they've had technological change that suddenly you've got mass unemployment. And I think, incidentally, that's one of the things when people talk about the fourth industrial revolution, they don't realize that jobs that are done away with some technologies are basically augmented with in the overall economy if it drives down costs. But having said that, I mean, what I'm looking at in these job creation zones is that we find the right mix of regulatory environment, but also the right entry levels of wages that get people in employment initially, and then they can move up the value chain. So, often the debate's very static. People say, oh, you can't pay someone, I don't know, X amount because it's not a good wage. But what that neglects is that in a dynamic economy, that should be your first job. Your second job, you jump into another one and you get a higher level of salary. And then as you get more skilled, you move into a different one. And basically you move through the levels. That's what happens in a functioning labor market. So the idea here would be that people come in, they create low-cost, high labor-intensive industry. And I've spoken to people in manufacturing. Basically, when I do a lot of presenting and speaking to people around the country, and certainly when I did a big exercise about 3-4 years ago, there was a lot of interest. Basically, it's yes, at that level I would actually employ X number more. And what I worked out at that point is that if we and now this is going back some years, so don't shoot me for this, but a sort of a 50,000 Rand type of salary and a very entry-level job. If we manage to get widespread employment creation, in other words, drive the unemployment level down to, say, 12-13% from the 27%, that would have a dramatic impact on the Gini coefficient. For example, it would go from 0.67 to about 0.57. And then if you manage to drive that wage up, by another 20,000 as people become more skilled over time, then the Gini coefficient comes down even further. So it really, I think there's a very practical solution which would both be attracting a new industry, but also basically creating jobs. So I don't think there's necessarily that contradiction. On the agricultural side, I mean, your argument there was that. Sorry, just give me a quick recap. I've lost my train of thought here again.
I was talking about in the light of the debate around the land that we have in South Africa right now, and you want to create employment.
Yeah. Look, I think the what's come out of this whole debate, which is quite interesting, is that if you have much more win-win solutions, so in other words, emerging farmers, government, labor, and communities and business, there are solutions which are already being employed and already creating jobs and already boosting production. We've actually got a scheme here in the Eastern Cape, which is an example of that. So, again, I think given now the level of interest and the amount of attention that this has actually grabbed, We're starting to see much more imaginative sort of solutions coming up in an industry which has been slowly drifting sideways rather than anything else. So again, I think it just requires good cooperation, but with a oneness of mind and a framework that government puts together that's not punitive one way or the other. And I think we've come up with some really good solutions there. There are already some good solutions. There's a question here, and then we'll come back if we get time. Sorry, there's a gentleman there.
Thank you. I have a question with regards to labor. From your presentation, I did not hear much. I think for the past period, you have realized that South Africa has been affected so much by labor strikes, disputes, but I did not hear much you talk about the extent to which they have affected the economy. And then the second one is to do with the SMEs. Do you really think that the government has done enough? I'm trying to draw attention to the issue that those who are finishing grade 12 and then going to university, there's a very big gap there. Especially what really is the government doing to handle this gap for those who are not making it to university, but they are also doing nothing. Basically, those are the two questions.
Okay, look, on the last one, is enough being done? I think clearly not. We've got a large portion of the population that's not been absorbed. But again, my view is we've got to absorb them into the workforce to actually get the skill levels, the vocational training up. It's absolutely crucial. You can't have people sitting idle. They're not going to actually become more vocationally skilled, and we're not going to see them more employable in 5 years' time. They're going to become less and less employable, which has been the tragedy. So, I mean, what do you do? Again, you actually have to try and get those entry-level jobs in. Because once you're employed, you basically, your skills are improved, but you're also much more employable because people see your track record. So I think, again, it comes down to trying to actually create base-level employment opportunities. And we're not seeing enough of that. And again, maybe these zones are the one idea that you could come up on that score. Sorry, your other question was around the
labor disputes.
Labor disputes. I mean, there's no doubt that the antagonistic labor environment has been very negative. I mean, I didn't mention it too much, but if you speak to small businesses, the fact that it's not even strike activity or anything like that. Just the fact that often they spend half the month at the CCMA in sort of like labour disputes. It creates a very, very static and hostile type of environment. So again, we've got to look at simplifying that process, making it a lot quicker, because and making it fair for everyone. Clearly, I mean, obviously there are cases where injustices have been put forward and they need to actually be addressed. But that's one of the key reasons why you see little job creation taking place in the small business sector. Because people are employment minimizers rather than employment maximizers, which in a country with this level of unemployment is crazy. We should actually be encouraging job maximization as much as we can to get rid of this problem. Sorry, while we're there, give that gentleman there, and then this gentleman here in the front, and we can go around that side.
Yeah, I just want to ask, if you're a student, let's say you have 5,000 rands, what would be the best place to start investing? And the second question I want to ask, the President earlier on introduced a stimulus. Was it really a stimulus or was it cost-cutting measures? So I want to know that.
Now, look, I'm gonna forego the 5,000 rand question because I'm not approved to talk about it. But we can chat about it. But I don't want to actually outline anything on that in particular. On the investment, or rather the stimulus package, as I said, it was very much a question of reprioritizing expenditure. We're going to have to wait and see in the medium-term budget policy statement. We've got a new finance minister, which should also be quite interesting to see his take on that. But the other big measure that came out of that was the so-called investment fund of 300, 400 billion rand. And it's going to be interesting to see how that is funded, whether it's and I know that there's a financial sector summit coming up, and I believe that some of that might be ahead of that summit. We might see some of that detail coming through. So that will also be interesting, but that will also be revealed at the time of the medium-term budget policy statement. Thanks. This gentleman over here with the red shirt. Sorry if you can. Yes.
Okay. Looking at your graphical presentation there, more on the GDP.
Yes.
On 2010, specifically, I'll pick that year, the GDP there was expected to increase, looking at the event that took place in our country. But it looked like it went in an opposite way. Now, I would like to find out, maybe if you can elaborate to me, whether do we know the reasons that made the GDP more specifically on 2010 to go in an opposite way than it should be? Because my understanding was that by now, 2011, we should have been celebrating the results that we got on 2010. And as a result, we should be looking on how to maintain that. But now, 2010, that we expected the economy to go up, and then it went on an opposite way. So, do you know those reasons? That is the first question. Okay. The second question is on your solutions there. More when we talk about the minimum wage there. Don't we think that minimum wage more, it's more about political gain? Because in my understanding myself, I think also this minimum wage is a contributing factor to the unemployment in South Africa. Can't we just look another way? Let's say we see how do we come up with the ways on how to protect the workers, not necessarily specifically talk about the minimum wage. The minimum wage, to me, the way I view it, it's like it's one of the causes that cause the unemployment in South Africa. Thank you.
Okay. Just on the 2010, if you look at this graph here, this decline here was really 2009. So that was a big recession in 2009. But 2010 itself was actually not too bad. So, we did see that bounce back. And if you look at, for example, the consumer spending and hotel industry and so forth did very well in 2010. So from 2010 to about 2012, the economy actually performed reasonably well as a result of that initial sort of kick in there. So I think it's probably just the way the graph looks. But in actual fact, we did see a reasonable improvement. But bear in mind that the global economy was still struggling at that stage. So what could have been a much more positive event was just mildly positive. It wasn't as strong as we actually had initially anticipated it to have been. So that's the one thing. On the minimum wage story, I think it's a little bit early to make any to draw any conclusions from the national minimum wage, but we do have sectoral minimum wages. I think that the difficulty with the national minimum wage is that when you look at formal industry, it almost has no effect at all, because industry and the financial sector and so forth are paying way above that national minimum wage. So it really does impact more on small and informal business, and in particular, obviously, over time, because it's going to be phased in, we don't quite know how yet, it will be phased into the so-called household sector, the domestic workers and the farm workers as well. And there, potentially, you could actually have very negative effects if they've set the level at the wrong level. So we'll have to wait and assess that. But I would tend to agree with you. I would like to see more worker protection, but not necessarily setting an arbitrary wage that applies right across the country, so it doesn't take into account local circumstances and local, if someone's creating a job in a very underserved infrastructural area, but that has high levels of unemployment, I wouldn't want to then say that they should be paying the same minimum wage as someone working in Johannesburg. It doesn't make all that much sense. So there are all sorts of difficult questions around that, but I do think there was, part of it was very political and obviously very driven by the trade unions as well. Okay, I think let's just try this side here first.
Okay, thank you. About the land debate, without dwelling much on it, I would like to believe it is contagious to the economy, like any other political topic. But then, drawing attention to this topic, obviously there are statements that are being released by politicians and that are being released by senior civil servants of the country. Doesn't that have a bearing on the risk and reward structure of an economy, maybe as it relates to foreign investors, maybe? Doesn't it have an influence on the risk and reward structure of the economy? Thank you.
Thanks. Look, I think it does. I mean, I think there's no question we're not seeing investment picking up as we had anticipated it might have done earlier this year. And I think now what investors are waiting for is, certainly if you speak to foreign investors, we see a lot of them coming through Johannesburg and Cape Town or whatever. But a lot of what's on their mind is, what is going to happen now post the election, what's happening to the land debate, and what are the final results going to be. So it's not that they're not interested in investing, but they're going to wait and see exactly what actually occurs. So, I think in the absence of that, probably we would have had a bit more of a lift up in the economy. But it's one of these things which, as I say, I think ultimately might have flushed out some good arguments and good debates, which we should have had anyway, and maybe gets to a better outcome without necessarily the penal side of it coming through, which obviously an investor would actually fear. So hopefully when we look back on it in a year's time, it will have reaffirmed what we understand as property rights and reduced the risks once again, but at the same time put in motion a much more accelerated land reform, which I think is necessary. But for the moment, in the very short term, I think it has been a bit damaging. Sorry, there's a couple of questions.
South Africa is one of the most established financial sectors in Africa, but we have quite a lot of black people in South Africa that are financially excluded from this market. So, and I believe that South African companies in general have quite low cash reserves, but they invest outside of the country, not in South Africa. Isn't that creating a situation where it's not assisting South Africa? Because if we had more South African companies investing in South Africa and expanding, probably that would assist in terms of job creation. Is the financial sector coming on board in terms of creating, perhaps creating an environment where they have more access to finances for SMEs? I think they have missing that perhaps maybe because of the politics, but South Africa is really a very two-tier country that is industrialized but also emerging at the same time. So, do you think the financial sector is doing enough in that respect?
Yeah, look, I think the interests are very much aligned. So, if you look at if you look at the banks, most of them are not expanding into other regions. They're looking at South Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa. That's been the focus. So, if South Africa is doing well, then basically the financial sector is doing well, and a little bit vice versa. So there's no question about that. I think there is a little bit of a fallacy about this massive cash position as far as companies companies are concerned. And there are two aspects to it. The one is, when people quote these numbers, they don't quote it in real terms. So I've got a graph, which unfortunately I haven't got available here, but in terms of, as a percentage of GDP, cash balances have actually come down quite significantly compared with 2006. But in 2006, we were investing more. So in other words, when cash balances are very high relative to GDP, you typically find significant investment taking place. The other thing, why it's a little bit of a fallacy, is that cash is not just sitting under the mattress. It's been invested, or rather it's going back into the financial system, and then being lent out. So if you look at the Reserve Bank statistics, it's quite interesting. The Reserve Bank shows that over 5 of the last 6 years, the corporate sector has been net borrowers, not net lenders, into the financial system. So in other words, what's happening is, I'm company A, I've got a big cash balance, put it on deposit, and that money is then lent to company B and company C. It's quite interesting. If you look at the graph of corporate deposits and household deposits in the last 2 years have actually been going up quicker. But no one says, there's too much funds in the household sector. And again, the same thing's happening. You've got certain households that have got surplus capacity, but then it's been on lent through the system. And that money is actually being deployed. And I think we're going to have a big debate later on this afternoon or this evening about on the financial sector and what the financial sector is doing. But I think there is a lot of concentration and a lot of focus on it, particularly at the moment, because there's a financial sector summit coming up, and there's also been a lot of look at the financial sector charter to look at developmental finance. So yes. I don't think that's necessarily the problem. I think the difficulty is investable projects. So in other words, are we seeing enough in the way of investable projects that can be funded? There is actually quite a lot of funding available if you've got the right project and it makes sense in terms of the numbers. Sorry, there's a question there, but if the people paying the mics can keep circulating.
I think you just answered part of my question I was going to ask. About the role of savings, household savings. I think you just addressed that. So I'll ask last different question. I don't think I've had enough emphasis on the role of investing in human capital, the role that can play in economic growth. For instance, with examples like Asian tigers in Asia, if you can talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think the timekeeper is coming up, but maybe I'll just quickly answer this one. I mean, absolutely, human capital is the most crucial thing. And I think if we've done one thing really badly as an economy, as a country, it's basically not actually addressed the education situation properly at primary, secondary, and tertiary level. So that must, in any longer-term restructuring. Set packages, education must be way up the list. But yes, there's a lot. Thanks for that.
Just want to make an announcement. We'll take one last question. One last question.
Thank you. Hello everyone, my name is Roundtable. On your recommendation to say something about job creation, I would like to know how do you suggest the country creates jobs as Nedbank? And I also have a comment, but it's more of a suggestion. I propose that the country starts with, maybe considering registering informal businesses or informal sector. It has been proven by many empirical studies and theories of school of thoughts that especially in less developed countries, also in other countries, but more in less developed countries, the informal economy is producing employment, like it's contributing largely on producing employment. And then there are also, the school of thought also suggests that in this informal business, because there's also a saying that they don't produce much profit and therefore they don't have much contribution in the economy and they don't have a potential of growth. But then there was a saying that some of the businesses from the informal sector, they do have a potential of growth. So that's why I suggest that we also propose that this business be registered. Then if we do that as the country, we can now be able to track some of the businesses that are able, that have a potential of growing. And I think with that, we can also be able to now say we want to create jobs, and we can now identify the businesses that can assist us in doing so.
Great, thanks. Well, let me ask. Look, I think we do have a very big informal economy. I mean, if you look at, for example, the household survey, if you look at the income versus the expenditure, they're very different, you know. So it implies that there's activity that's not being captured. Clearly, that is the case. But why do you have an informal economy? It's because often businesses choose to remain in the informal economy because of the regulatory environment. So, you know, what I'm suggesting is that within a contained experiment, we see if we can get job creation taking place by reducing that regulatory framework and that policy framework, and then see if it works. If we can tweak different levers and actually see which one actually works. But you've got to actually attract businesses to come into an environment that they feel that they can, create those jobs and basically at the same time make profits. So that's why I'm making this proposal of the sort of like job creation zones. Thanks very much. Thank you, everyone.
Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be taking over as the program director to finish up the last part of the program. Let me first thank Dennis for the enlightening presentation. And as you can see, Dennis, there's a lot of issues that really needs serious discussion coming from the students. I could see some of the things you didn't really touch on the presentations, but they keep coming up, which means we need such gatherings where we actually discuss the topical issues about our economy. Having said that, I need to move with the program. We are a bit behind time. My name is Palesa Mahetakosi, the HOD in Economics Department. For some reason, I'm always hijacked to be the program director, but I will not state why. You can just figure it out yourself. Why me? Okay, now we're going to continue with our program. As we continue with our program, we are going to focus now on the project itself that we came up with NetBank, the school project. Just a brief background on how this particular project came up. We basically said as a department, and we felt as the university, we more or less not really operating, we're operating in isolation in the fact that we're not working with the schools, perhaps assisting where we can. And a lot of ideas came up as to how can we assist the students, specifically in our area, but obviously this is an idea that we've also proposed to the whole faculty and we are taking it up. Unfortunately for us, because we've got our supporters, the NetBank, which they've been supporting us for quite a long time now. We have Professor Moon as the NetBank chair funded by Nedbank and who's supervising quite a number of our students. A lot of the students who are staff members are actually being supervised by the very same Nedbank chair. So this is just to show the appreciation for the funding that we are getting from Nedbank. I just want to put the students at ease. I'm sure when you looked at the presentations and the questions that are coming from the university students, and you're thinking, oh God, this is going to be so tough. This is your day. Now, what we're doing here today, Prof. Mhlungu, we went to the different schools to identify students with the assistance of the teachers in the different schools. To identify students, we have a topic that we put forward, which will be presented by the students, and they all had to write the essay, and out of that we had to select some students that will represent the schools. Our aim is to recruit as many students from the different schools, and this way we are trying to ensure that the students trying to somehow close also that gap. For now, it's still just in economics, the gap between the fact that what is happening at university level, what is happening at high school. So we want to work with high schools on that aspect. So the students that are here, the scholars that are here, have prepared essays with the assistance from the teachers, and they're going to present those essays. They are adjudicators, and from that we are going to choose winners. But before we do that, I just need a big round of applause for these students who are here for making it even to this level. And secondly, we need a big round of applause for them. They're very busy, and we've highlighted a lot of challenges in the education system, but they are here and they've assisted the scholars to also be part of this competition. I don't know if our IT is ready, so I'm going to call the first student, and I want you to be very comfortable. Don't just do what you were told to do by your teachers. We are here to support you, so do not be scared. The first student that I'm going to call is Ayabonga Pango from Sipota Mago High School.
I'm going to present today is divided into two parts. The first one says, what are the causes of poverty in West Indies? And the second part says, how can education be used to address these problems? Firstly, I would like to introduce my topic by saying, poverty is a state of being extremely poor. Poverty, it is an issue that is debated worldwide, and it is one of the serious problems facing South Africa, mainly in Eastern Cape. Cause of poverty, and they are shown the first is high population rate. Eastern Cape with approximately 7 million population. 7. Can I please start with urbanization?
Yes.
Urbanization. The people of the Eastern Cape, when they have had enough of the poverty, they decide to go to the urban areas to find employment in order to feed their families. When they arrive into the urban areas, they see things they have never seen before. They find themselves spouses, and they forget about their families back at home. And they find
for the mere fact that he actually did the first line. That is actually good. I know it's the most difficult thing. You are presenting to university professors, you are presenting to university students. So we should understand them. These are the future leaders, so we must support them. We will give him another chance. He needs to just cool down. So we are going to call the next student. The teachers, you are allowed to come and stand with your students just to support them. There's nothing wrong with that. You understand them better. So we're going to call, before I do that, before Teho kills me, sorry, I forgot a very important thing. We've got our guests from Nedbank. They're sitting right at the back. During breaks, as we are clapping, you must just go and check what they have on the table. They've got very interesting promotions there. So you need to go and check. Before you exit the university, you must be knowing about this. Okay, Kanya Sidekiana from Minganatelo Senior Secondary School.
I'd like to take this opportunity and thank the Program Director and Nedbank in conjunction with the University of Fort Hare for the opportunity like this. My topic today is what are the causes of poverty in the Eastern Cape and how can education be used to address those problems. But I'll start by acknowledging the presence of the Vice Chancellor and Mr. Dennis from the Nedbank. Now I'm here to present and explain on a topic that I've already announced. My topic today has topics on causes of poverty. One of the causes of poverty in the Eastern Cape that I identified is high unemployment rate. High unemployment rate, it is when a person who is actively looking for employment but cannot have employment in a positive time right now. SATSA's report 2018 revealed that the Eastern Cape province has the highest unemployment rate, that is 46%, and that leads to high unemployment rate for the Eastern Cape province. Our second point is low levels of education. The development of education in the Eastern Cape reflected that the performance that the Eastern Cape does is in the lowest point. Therefore, it happens that due to the lack of infrastructure, lack of commitment from learners, lack of teacher subjects that are in the teaching schools. So that leads to the lack of people attaining the level of education, and that makes them become unskilled laborers. Then we have our third point, physical asset. When we talk about physical asset, we talk about land. When we talk about land, we talk about land reformation. And when we talk about that, we know that most black people are dominated in the Eastern Cape, and they live in making for themselves crops that are to gain for their homes. So in order for us to know that the people in the economy needs to have certain crops to gain for their homes if they do not have the source of income. Then we have fourth point, household size. Period 2016 stated that household size is an essential number of people who are able and are responsible in finances. When Mayor 2016 stated that there is an unclear relationship of poverty and household size, he meant that when a person is one person educated, means they're able to make use of their homes, provide food, provide clothing for the children. But when you look into, for example, in Joburg municipality in Iron North, most people they are unemployed, they are uneducated, and therefore they have a number of children in their households, and they do not have even the source of income. So that makes them have the high unemployment rate and experience it. Then we have lack of basic needs. When we talk about basic needs, we talk of adequate supplies of water and sanitation. In necessities of life, well-being, and human dignity. Households owned by poor people and normally made in the poor rural areas do not have the basic needs that are provided. That was stated by Mbuli 2008. Then we come to gender. Gender is divided into two. We have males and females. And we normally know that most of us, females, do not get the high positions at work, because men are more superior than us. The Stats SA 2018 report revealed that 60% of households headed by women are less superior. But then male-dominated people, they are higher than us, which is they compare us women and males in comparison of gender. So us women suffer a lot when heading our homes. Then how may we do this? How can education be used to reduce poverty? But given that female empowerment is one of the things that can make us empower the education levels. When you can educate women in knowing how to hold and themselves, not to have many children, or be able to provide a certain way in providing social incomes for themselves, to provide nutrition for the families and make use of their families and such. Then we have a second point, that boosting the economy. Boosting our local economy will help us in making productivity in such ways of having physical assets, making land for our families, and growing crops to distribute evenly to the people. Then we all know that our former president, Nelson Mandela, always used emphasis and quotes to emphasize in a certain situation. In this case, education, as he said, education is the most powerful weapon to change lives. So, in conclusion, I'd like to say, us as young people, us as this generation, we can use education as a tool and to use some things that are happening in our lives to reduce poverty levels, mostly in the Eastern Cape. I thank you.
If I had Kanya, clearly Kanya says, Watita Bafas. Okay, thank you, Kanya. The next one, or should we go back to Aya? Aya, you ready? Aya Galuki must be ready. Okay. Pumele Jasi from Sipot Abaku High School.
Greetings to you all. My name is Melela and my surname is Jasi. I'm from Sipotamago and currently doing grade 12. The topic that I'm going to present to you is divided into two parts. The first part is what are the causes of poverty in the Eastern Cape, and the second part is how can education readdress this problem. As you can see on my screen, I have about 4 important bullets, of which they are my body for my essay. My introduction. The Eastern Cape province is situated in the south. Oh Jesus! Is seated in the south coast of South Africa. The population of Eastern Cape is approximately 7 million, which makes us the most or the least province that has a high population rate. Labor Force Survey 2018 reveals that the Eastern Cape province has the highest rate of poverty, of which is not shown, I don't know why, but I had percentages already. Infrastructure and also unemployment. Poverty is the worst, we know, is the worst, like challenging issue in the Eastern Cape because Aisha Salam. And you can see it is approximately 69% in the Eastern Cape, of which our country, or let me say our province, is the leading or the second leading province which has the highest level in poverty. Education can be used as a tool. We all know education is a weapon actually that can open doors to readdress the challenges of poverty. Can you please slide for me? Thank you. The challenges faced by education. The challenges faced by education in the Eastern Cape is high levels of unemployment. According to a Quality Labor Force survey, that shows that the Eastern Cape is leading, or is the second leading province by 46%. in unemployment. The expanded unemployment rate includes people who have stopped, actually they have stopped, like literally stopped looking for jobs, who are between 1,059,000 and also 1,600,000, between the ages of 16 and 65. But actually it is the youth that is leading mostly in unemployment here in the Eastern Cape. My second bullet is lack of education. I would throw this one to the government. Sorry. Because government do not give us enough teachers in schools for us to be actually educated and to be trained. And that is actually a loss for us as students, because some students actually do not see the necessity of going to school, or do not see the necessity of being at school actually, so they usually drop out. Okay, infrastructure deficiency. Thank you. In the Eastern Cape, we know that we are more rural than other provinces, and we are the most rural province, of which government doesn't see us as a product to develop them. Like, for instance, if you go to Kingdomstown, you would see like high buildings, big shops, malls, but if you actually go to your alleys, it's surrounded by actually rural areas. It's more rural than the Kingdomstown. And you would actually ask yourself why. But I throw that to the government. Okay. And how can education be used to address these problems? Okay. Increase earnings. Okay. They can increase income earnings. Like, people from the Eastern Cape have a lower income level, but they are more educated. And as if you can see, people in the universities who come out from universities, who come out from high schools, even though the matric results are currently dropping, but more people who are educated actually come from the Eastern Cape. But I don't see why they are actually unemployed. Okay, urbanization. Wow, we like that a lot. I actually promote myself going to Johannesburg for studying, because I see a lot of opportunities there, not just because it is more popular on TV or something else, but if you see, there is actually employment there. There is a better education facilities, and also it is so good. My conclusion is that education is not only the key to healthy and prosperous life, but life itself. The government, together with the private sector, must invest heavily in education to achieve its goals of poverty erection. And that's all. I thank you.
I actually wondered how was I in high school when I looked at her. Okay, nonetheless, let's move. We are now going to call Sinazono Lope from Lonwabo High School. It seems it's ladies.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank the University of Fort Hare and the NetBank Chief Economist for giving me this great opportunity to be standing here today in front of you. I greet you all. I'm Sinazono Lope from Lonwabo High School in Bedford, recently doing grade 12. My essay is divided into two phases. The first phase includes the introduction and the causes of poverty, and the second phase includes how can education can be used to address these problems. I would like to start by saying poverty is a scarcity or the lack on certain amount of material possession or money. It is a multifaceted concept. That means it has different features or different aspects, which may include economic, environmentally, and political elements. Generally, there are two types of poverty. The first one is absolute poverty, which refers to complete lack of necessary basic needs, such as shelter, clothing, and food. And the second one is relative poverty, which occurs when people who live in a given country does not enjoy a certain minimum level of a living standard. The causes of poverty are as follows. The first cause is a lack of infrastructure development. For example, there are no proper roads, electricity, water, and sanitation in the Eastern Cape. And most people migrate to urbanization in search of a quality of a good life. And young people who graduated from universities prefer to stay and go to a better place that has better facilities. And the second cause is diseases such as HIV and AIDS and poor health facilities. Okay, diseases such as HIV and AIDS are the causes that brings about occurrence that is among the leading cause of poverty, because people are losing their breadwinners or cannot afford to pay for treatment because of earning a small amount of money. And the third cause is overpopulation. When too many people live in a geographical location, they compete over the resources. But the chances are that the resources are not always going to support everyone, because there are no enough resources to support in the Eastern Cape. And there is illiteracy and lack of education. A lack of education can bring about a major problem in the Eastern Cape, because when you are going to school, you become equipped with skills, and that can make you being employable. And those who hasn't go to school, more money, for example, are working as a casual laborers with minimum wages. And there is gender inequality. That is still a major problem in the 21st century, because although there has been some remarkable improvement in addressing the gender of inequality, because the people are not being treated equally in the Eastern Cape. And there is economic inequality. The income is being distributed inequally in the Eastern Cape, and that causes the poverty cycle, because the income is not distributed equally. And there is natural causes such as drought, floods, and earthquakes, which can bring about devastations and hardships in the economy. For example, people may lose their businesses, may lose their houses, may lose their income as a result of a natural disaster. And the last cause is the resistance to change. When people are resisting to change, that will also bring about hardship in the economy, because the Eastern Cape will slow down. Okay. And the next question is, how can education can be used to address these problems? Through basic education, marginalized people learn more about health and are better able to protect themselves against the diseases. The level of health among children and young people improves when their parents have education, or when their parents are educated. This in return increases their likelihood of receiving and benefiting from an education. And educated girls are a key factor to bring about low birth rate because they are aware of what is happening in the poverty. And it is important to always remember that the improvements in one area benefits to several others. And education can be transmitted between generations, because that will bring about high level of a living standard in the Eastern Cape. And also, it has an effect on health, economic development, and environmental process. And I would like to conclude by saying, poverty is a big problem in the Eastern Cape, and it affects people because the people who are living in poverty are trying to help themselves by working in a few jobs in order to improve their education. Okay. It is government role and responsibility to help and make sure that less people live in poverty by investing in education or by creating programs that will benefit people or programs that will uplift the living standards in the Eastern Cape. And, okay, programs that will benefit people in order to improve their living standard. Thank you.
From all the presenters, listening to them, it just crossed my mind that next time we must have a competition between high school and honors. The honor students will understand why I'm saying. Okay, we are now going back to Aya. Aya, you are not going to be the last on my point. We are now calling you. I'm sure now you're okay. Eh? You can come over. Ayabonga Pango from
Greetings to you all again. My name is Ayabonga Pango. I'm currently doing grade 12 at Sikotama High School in Ireland. The topic I'm going to present today is what are the causes of poverty? How can education be used to address these problems? Poverty is a state of being extremely poor. And poverty, it is an issue that is debated worldwide. And it is one of the issues that is facing South Africa, mainly in the Eastern Cape. Firstly, high population rate. Eastern Cape, approximately with 7 million population. With 7 million population, estimated to be around 13% of South African population. When the population increases, it will be hard for the people of the Eastern Cape to provide food for their families. Because living in a large population, it is not easy to escape poverty. And the second part is urbanization. When the people of the Eastern Cape have had enough of poverty, they decide to go to the urban areas to find employment in order to provide food for their families. When they arrive to the urban areas, they see many things they have never seen before, and they find themselves spouses that they forget about their families back at home. After they have forgotten about their family back at home, they will continue to live in poverty. And the family will be waiting in forced hope, waiting for their breadwinner to send money to buy food. South Africa remains South Africa, Eastern Cape remains a South African poorest province. The people of the Eastern Cape do not regard unemployment as a serious problem, while education and health remains a great concern in the province. Illiteracy. Illiteracy is a state of being unable to read. The Eastern Cape is a place that is known full of farmers, and those people do not know how to read. All they are committed to is their job. All they are committed to is their job. In the Eastern Cape, kids quit school at an early age because of poverty back at home. When they quit school, the rate of poverty will be going to increase. And the second part is how can education be used to address these problems? Firstly, huge businesses can do CSR programs, doing feeding schemes to feed the poorest. And secondly, government must increase taxes so that there can be more money to spend in the economy to the poorest. In conclusion, I would like to advise the government to try and invest more in working in order for them to develop, like giving up bursaries to the rural areas so that the kids can study further and be employed. Thank you.
I looked at the Vice Chancellor when you said the taxes should be increased. I thought I was the only one who reacted. Thank you, Aya. We have the last one. We had two students we need to congratulate at school. The Sipotamago High School. We had two students coming from that school. They deserve a round of applause. That's what we want from all schools, more representation. Okay, Zintle Nzangani from Josimachele High School.
Greetings to everyone. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the Vice Chancellor, Mr. Dennis, and the organizers of this event who have gave us this opportunity. May God bless you. I'm Zinhle Nzangani. I'm from Josimachele High School. And the question is, what are the causes of poverty in the Eastern Cape province? And how can education be used to address these problems? And my introduction is, according to the Daily Dispatch on the 23rd of August 2017, the Eastern Cape remains the poorest province in South Africa. And then there are two types of poverty. that is absolute poverty and relative poverty. Most people in the Eastern Cape are in an absolute poverty because it's difficult for them to meet their basic needs with their income. Then coming to my body, here are some of the causes of poverty in the Eastern Cape. It's education system. Education system in the Eastern Cape is one of the causes of poverty because of teacher shortage. In our province, as a result, the Eastern Cape is always at the bottom in the matric, as the results in 2017 is more than 30% of our learners failed matric, and that has an improvement as compared to some previous years. Like before 2017, there were more than 30% students who have failed the matric. It's in the Eastern Cape where we find that the critical subjects like accounting and physical sciences being phased out because the learners are failing the subjects due to the lack of educators in FET level. As a result, learners are unable to continue with their studies. Due to the lack of educators in the Eastern Cape, the educators that are already in the field are being overloaded because they teach more than one subject in grade 12. As a result, the learners are being compromised, e.g. learners can't qualify to enter the higher institutions, and some they drop out. Then the second one is unemployment rate. You know, there is a high unemployment rate in South Africa, especially in the Eastern Cape province, because of corruption and bureaucracy in our province. When I said the word bureaucracy refers to the nepotism, then you will find out that many people are bribing to get the jobs. Sometimes females use their bodies to get employed. Most people are having sex, and some of them they are getting in love with someone who is not his or her type because he wants to be employed. Some of them are being employed based on their relatives, and some because they are affiliated in the same ruling party of the municipality. In the Eastern Cape, there are many people who are unemployed, and it's not that they do not have skills, but it's because of the corruption and bureaucracy. Then the third one is the population growth in Eastern Cape. The population growth in Eastern Cape is very high, and it's full of people who are depending on social grants. And these social grants are unable to meet their social needs because some of them, for example, teenagers are getting pregnant while they are still studying. As a result, they drop out at school, and that accelerates poverty in the Eastern Cape. Then the fourth one is the bad governance. There is a high corruption in the Eastern Cape because most high-profile leaders in the provincial government are being accused of misuse of financial resources. Some local municipalities are being found underspending and some overspending by the auditors. It indicates the poor management that we have in the province. As a result, there are few municipalities that provide provide a clean, qualified report yearly. And most schools are slowly joining those bad municipalities as well. Then the fifth one is the tendering system. The tendering system is being awarded in a corrupt way through a friendship and bureaucracy. Tenders are empowering those people that are already rich. Like, let me add some example. Like, you will find out that many people, those who are poor are becoming to be more poor, and those who are richer are becoming to be more richer, because those goods and services didn't reach to those people who are poor. Those people that are working on those tenders earn peanuts with the money. They cannot buy resources to contribute to the economy. They can only buy food. This is how can the education be used to address these problems. And here are my solutions. One is education. Education must be prioritized, as it has the potential to eradicate poverty and minimize the inequality. This needs to be improved to reduce the high poverty in the Eastern Cape province. By doing this, we need to provide skills to each school town so that many learners will become skilled and do practicals to find some jobs. Provide labs to each school. It gives learners an opportunity to do practicals more than theory. Provide libraries to each school so that learners will have the variety of textbooks. Provide agricultural practicals. For example, creating some project at school where the learners are required to plow some vegetables so that they will be able to plow at their homes. As the economy of our province depends on agriculture, so we need to encourage plowing in our homes and communities. Then the second one is employment. Like if someone wants to be employed, he or she must be the relative of someone who is a man. Sometimes they want people to sometimes they want people to bribe for their job. There must be some regular trainings to all government employees so that the unskilled workers could continue with their work. There must be some incentives in the form of motivation to all employees that have excelled in their duties. And here my conclusion is, the Eastern Cape can be better than what it is, as we all know that most powerful policies that are being developed in South Africa are coming from the people of the Eastern Cape. The best president that the nations are still talking about even today is in the worldwide is from the Eastern Cape. So there is a potential in this province. All we need is to invest a lot in the education system. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Zinhle. And thank you very much to all the students. The reason we actually brought our own students here, and masters and PhD, you can see that there are a lot of research areas there. There are a lot of things that the scholars are coming up with which we need to research on. So I hope you've noted all of those points. We are now going to continue with our program and invite our principal to address us. Over to you, Prof.
Very, very much, Program Director, and this is a real pleasure for me to welcome the schools. I think we can give them another one. This is a very important kind of meeting. The school and the university, facilitated and sponsored by the bank. Thanks very much, Mr. Dykes. I just want to, I'm glad I came at that point. I did when you were still speaking, and I was able to connect the dots with the students at the end. First of all, this is the second cycle of the Nedbank chair in economics. The first cycle expired last year, and then we renewed the agreement for another 3 years. So, and the person who actually occupies the chair is Professor Munas Smadil. She went out. Yes, she's the person. So she did the first 3 years, and then another 3 years now. And we're really grateful to Nedbank for that kind of support, and we hope that it will be an ongoing form of support. We also get free advertising to a captive audience here. But on a serious note, thank you very much. We value that support. I think that the interface between higher education and banks is very, very important. As I said, you have a captive audience here. These people bank, they have bank accounts, they bank with people. Some of them utilize other banking services. So that opportunity is very important for us. And we do know that banks can be generous when they choose to be. They can give you a chair in economics. They can even put up a hall like this in East London. So they can do all sorts of things, and we look forward to the conversations with them. But I was struck by your presentation on the South African economy and where we stand relative to everything, especially global trends. Just to bring it down to the Eastern Cape, I was born in this province, and I lived here until I was 22. And then I left for a long time. Don't ask me, long time. And I lived in 2 other provinces, namely, more than 20 years I lived in Gauteng, Johannesburg. And then I went to the Western Cape for a second time, and I came back here. I must say, it was a shock coming back. It was a shock coming back because it's as if the province has regressed. Towns that I used to know, that used to be beautiful, have actually become, it was interesting, one of the students spoke about Alice. Alice was better. I almost said, Alice was a better town when I left. I left the province 1987. Than when I came back to the province last year. And that can be said about many of the towns. It's London. It used to be a beautiful, clean town. None of these run-down buildings. Tata used to be a very nice town. But all of that, there's been this sense of regression, this sense that things are broken. And you find this throughout the province. The roads, in many places, have broken down. The infrastructure is not in good shape. So I was intrigued by what you're saying, because then if you add to that state of brokenness, you add unemployment and you add poverty. It is a pretty dismal picture there, and that is a source of concern. Just another statistic, just like to add what the young people were saying here and what you were saying. One statistic that the Human Sciences Research Council shared a few years ago was that in the Eastern Cape, 53% of households are female-led. In other words, there's no man in that house. There's no man and woman. I think father and mother. It's only father and mother. 53% of the household. Now that is a shock. The other statistic, also come from the Human Sciences Research Council research, found that 37% of young people, 37% have never met their father. They don't know the father. They've never met their father. So it's not just the economic fiber that you painted here that is broken. It's also the social fiber, the thing that holds us together. And once you get all of those two together, and you really you should get worried. And I like this because what the NetBank chair does, it brings together the economic and the social. It pulls them together. So once again, thank you very much for the support. I'll just, while I'm here, also thanks to Professor Smartele, because she's been the anchor driving all of these other things. And one of the projects, of course, is the schools project, to bring schools into the loop and to make a contribution, so to reach out. As Fort here, this is our home, this is our base. If you go to Alice, like she was saying, we're surrounded by villages. We're surrounded by villages, and there's an obligation that comes with that. That we can't just continue as an island as the University of Fort Hare. We're not an island. Those communities are our fathers, those are our families, extended families. But most importantly, that's where our students come from. So we here, we're not going to dissolve Fort Hare and put it somewhere in another place. We're also not going to dissolve the communities and wish them away so that we become this ivory tower. We're right here, and we better make use of it. So again, very important. Just the schools project. I think it's a major contribution. It's a major contribution. It's not a small thing for a high school kid to come along here and address people like this. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of work, and so on. And that is something in itself. It's something. There's 5 kids who presented here. 5, 10, 15 years, they'll look back to this day and think about, and say, that was my first step in life. That was my first step as an adult. And I think we really need to, again, give them a round of applause. But the important thing of the schools project is also that we don't want to near Cape Town, near Northwest, near the university is right here next to you. And the reason that all of us, Professor Smartele, HOD, the reason we're here, the reason we did not go to other places, or the reason we came back from other places, is precisely to be at your service, so that we can serve you. We can improve things here. I heard some of you say, yeah, when it comes to school education, those schools, they're still prevalent in this province. People still learn under those conditions in mud schools. But more than that, even the new schools that have been built since democracy in 1994, zihlala namhlanje, zakhiwa namhlanje zivulwe, uziminister bakhathela 3 years down the line, iminyaka uphukile vulani ibhoke ngaphakathi. Even the new schools. One of the students said something quite remarkable and very important. So what's going to happen then with our the children are going to be up and about, belabalaba, because there's no one to teach them. I can tell you the one thing, and the university people will tell you this. There's one thing that explains the poor performance of our school. There's one thing, and there may be other factors. Once you cut into contact time, you've killed it. Once you cut into contact time between teacher and students, you've killed it. Just stop and pause for a minute and think about the other schools where teachers don't do this, where teachers go to class. And we always see this differential between white schools and black schools. It's almost chalk and cheese. These schools say, no, black people can't perform. It's not that. If you go to those other schools, 7:30 is 7:30, the teacher is in class. Up to the end of the teaching day, every day. The day is there. The problem, if you compare just how we use that contact time between the schools, you see it's the biggest explanation that we have. It's the biggest explanation. Because once the students are not in class, they lose time. And you will never make up for it. So you carry this so-called disadvantage. Carry this thing that you're poor. But you know, your life, your future was broken by adults. By adults who should have known better. Who went to school in their own time. Who were not disrupted in their own time. But suddenly now they preside over the destruction of our system of education. So I want to encourage you to carry on and come to Fort Head. Apply. They're applying about value and you see. Just to say that the future of this province, I listen to all of you. I listen to Mr. Dyke's presentation. Yes, things look very dire, very difficult, very troubled, very broken. There's nothing that is, there's very little that inspires confidence. But this is very important. No one else is going to come from another planet and fix this problem. No one. It's going to be us, you and I, these professors, yourselves, the teachers in the schools. That's who is going to make things turn around in this province. So I just want you to imagine yourself in another 10, 15 years, standing in place of the head of economics at Fort Head, occupying that position. Imagine yourself. Imagine the unimaginable. Think that is hard to think or imagine, and will be it. And I just want to say finally, of course, I want to take a picture with all of this, the presenters, what the ones they've done. I just want to say this, that we teach and run the university. We're aging. We're getting old. We're old already. Who's going to fill those positions? Who's going to fill those positions of lecturer, administrator, professor, VC, and all of those? It's you. The material is not going to come from anywhere else. It's going to come from yourselves. So brace yourselves up, fasten your seatbelts, and study hard, and come to Fort Head. Not only to study, but to work. And once again, I just want to thank the head of economics, the staff in economics, Professor Smarte. This is a very important moment, just for us to talk and sit in this way. It may seem small to you, but this is profoundly important. And once again, let's build our institution so that this future, it doesn't go to waste. I thank you very much.
Okay. crisis. But having said that, the Vice Chancellor has already alluded to this. Congratulations to all the students who've done quite well. Whether you become number one or you become whatever, but no, you've done very well. And we are expecting you in the economics department next year to be our first students. And I am sure you'll be presenting also to the other first students because you are now more experienced than that. I'm going to hand over now to Tifo and Prof. Muna for the presentation of prizes to the students. But before that, there was a student that there was a school that I announced, and I said there were 2 students from that school. I've been told to announce that the teacher from that school is an alumni in Forte. The teacher is right behind. I think he doesn't want to stay. Actually, I'm seeing a lot of faces of people that I also taught who are now teachers in this high school. So, but I think it's very important. Can all the teachers from the different schools really stand so that we can order it for them? Can all the teachers stand? Because this competition started last year. She is here and she's a student therefore. So Vice Chancellor, we are definitely doing quite well. So IPA.
There were some students that wanted to ask Dennis a question. Now's your time. Anybody wants to ask Dennis a question? You both want to ask questions? Yes. I thought you had a chance.
You know what? I'm going to make it different. I'm going to call one of the honor students to just come and present something to, just to thank everyone who's here. And we see the presentation skills. Just one person from the honors class, whether Addis or Islam, just to say something.
What is going on?
The honor students are scared to present. So it means great house are better than yours. Master students?
Too important.
Okay, what's the way also present? I'm trying to do this here. They are afraid of what? You are disappointing us in
I know that, and the rest of us know that we won't get the end of the degree. Someone doesn't come in. But I think, but it's in a good way. You actually pushing us to excel and be able to stand in front of people and to put fear aside and so on and so forth. But today is such a privilege and an honor to be standing here and to be here actually hearing the report that Mr. Janice did provide for us and having our VC. It's the first time I think besides graduation here you're having a speech. But I think it's very interesting what you brought about, and I think the most triggering thing, I guess, for all of us in this room is that the unemployment rate that we see that it is skyrocketing, and it's a concern for us because I'm in an honors class, and next year I would like to pursue a job, I would like to look for a job, but with the stats that you provided and the stats that are out there, it proves that it's very difficult for us to join the workforce and be employed. So I think it was very informative what we had here, and as well the students that came and presented, the high school kids, it was such a, like I took a lot from what you were presenting. There was a lot of good points that you presented, and we thank you as the honor students from the University of Forte, and thank you.
We're just going to announce the top 3 teams, but I think what's important to note is that all of you are winners. What you did here was a sterling job, and you should be proud of yourselves. The fact that you took your time to put together these essays, you were brave enough to come stand here and present to us. That is commendable. That's an sterling job. It's just unfortunate that you can't award all of you, but just know that all of you are winners, okay? You're all going to get a consolation prize. Right? We're going to start with, so it's the top 3, and we're going to start with number 3. And number 3 gets 700 towards the school. And the name of the school is
process of sound formatting, and then showing elements of the now and then cover. Thinking, let us think in the air. Let me stretch it.
And I want to again just congratulate the young people for taking the courage, firstly to submit, and then making it this. They were not the only ones that submitted, just in case you think so. There were actually how many students? And these were the top 5. So it's a really good job that you have done, and we're very glad to have you here. And we want to just hope that this opportunity that you had, whether you want something or not, that you're going to use it as a stepping stone to do better in life. And one of the things that we said for the people that are participating in this competition is that you should have a give back opportunity in your school. So don't go back and say, yeah, I want 700 rand. Then that's the end. You now become an encouragement to your friends that better things can happen in your life. And I like what the priest is saying, that don't look at the places where you come from as places that have nothing to offer, and then that's the end. You now become a catalyst to make something of that place where you come from. And I think that's the purpose of bringing you here. Yes, guys? And your teachers, I'm sure, understand that. I can see the excitement in the teachers that they are going to do something better, and I hope that we'll have more submissions for next year's competition, and that you will be the ones that are going to mentor those that are going to enter the competition next year. I'll leave the madam, as we call her.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to be short, but I just want to thank Ms. Dennis, our vice president. With their schedules, we know they are very busy, but they made time and sacrifice to be here with all our economic students and the scholars from the high school. And for that, we really thank you for your presence on this occasion. And we know that this will grow and grow, and in the next coming few years, it will be a very biggest event, which is not only for economists, but mainly for the different departments. As I highlighted, that the faculty as a whole will really want to assist in high schools, so that we are able to close the gap between the grade 12 learners and the first year university level. So for that, thank you very much for being here, and we're hoping that you will always grace us with your presence for such occasions. And secondly, I would like to thank the teachers, as I highlighted, for the scholars. As you could hear, that some of the challenges raised by the scholars is the shortages of teachers, which for us as Conservatives raises a concern to say we've got a Department of Education, which perhaps we need to see how we can assist if there's such challenges within the province.
But apart from that, even though there are shortages of teachers, the teachers still sacrifice an assistant teacher. So we thank you for that, and we hoping that you continuously be committed and be part of this competition and grow with us as we introduce more and more to this particular competition. And lastly, thank you to the students. Prof. Moon has already highlighted that one. I'm hoping to see you on our first year class next year. We are here as Forte. Forget Joburg. It will not help you with anything. Most of the leaders came from Forte. And the only reason that some of the people that also were born in Eastern Cape will go and come back, it's because Eastern Cape is the place. It's really the place. It's us who can make the change in Eastern Cape, as the BC has already alluded to that. So for us to run away and say we're going to the bigger cities, it's fine, you can go there for growth, but then we need to come back and help. For some of us, we're born here and we're still here, and perhaps we still need to contribute more and ensure that the province really grows. So we need that assistance from the students. And again, there's an aspect that is always highlighted now, going to the honors students, master students, and some of the third year students. We really need to think outside the box. Unemployment is an issue. It's an issue country-wise. So what is it that we're doing about it? Are we just going to sit and wait for jobs? Is that what we're being taught in class? We need to really think outside the box. We've seen that it's a challenge, but we do not want to produce students that are just sitting at home. That is not the aim. With that, you've seen the economics students, the economics department is actually made up of it's mostly young stars. I think the only older people there, it's 3 of us. The rest is these students that we taught from first year, second year, they finished their masters and now they are lecturing. And that's exactly what we want. So we will really encourage you that we do not want you to add on the unemployment rates, but be innovative, come up with something and create employment. So that was the reason we actually invited also our postgrad students to see how they can actually assist. So thank you very much, and also thank you to the university as a whole, DMC, for assisting also in organizing this particular event. We also thank CIFLE and their teams, CIFLE Chaka and their team, for organizing this particular event. And my colleagues will kill me if I don't thank them. Thank you very much, Economics Department. We are hoping that this event next year will take place at the sport complex in Alice, because we are hoping that the people that will attend there will be 500. Thank you very much. Those are my last words.
Thank you everyone who comes to the end of the program. I just want to say there's some food outside, so as you go out, please just grab and thank you. We'll see you not next year, maybe next week.
Huh?